Congressman Gonzales, welcome back here. President Trump making changes there in D.C. at a rapid pace. I'm curious what you think is long overdue and what, if anything, concerns you about this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jason. And, in just a couple of weeks, President Trump has certainly made some changes, and those changes have been felt. I was recently in El Paso. I was also in Del Rio. I represent I represent 2/3 of the Texas-Mexico border. And what I'm seeing is everyone is excited. They're excited for a new day. They're excited for the change. They're also anxious, though. Anytime anytime you're going to be surging thousands of troops to the border, people have questions. Where are they going to be housed? How are they going to interact with other agencies? Who has what authorities? Who's going to play what roles? So I think we're off to a very positive start, but we got to make sure that all partners involved are on the same page.
Congressman, you're also back from Germany where you were watching U.S. troops as they participated in some NATO exercises. Is there a concern at all that they might be moved from that European role to the southern border for a new role by President Trump?
There is, and Jason, I'm a retired Navy Master Chief. It's an E9. I'm the highest enlisted service member to ever serve in Congress. I had the fortune to spend a few days in the woods with the Sergeant Major of the Army, and we were going over kind of all their operations. The military is going to flex to whatever the President of the United States needs and wants, and keeping America safe is certainly a priority, but it comes at a cost, and some of that cost maybe soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, maybe less ready for their actual job. You also talk about Gitmo, Guantanamo. I've been stationed at Gitmo before when I was active duty military. That's a base that wasn't meant to house detainees long term. So there's some challenges that are going to come our way. And the last thing I'd say is Congress has a role to play in this. A big part of it is oversight and in funding, making sure that the president's agenda is being fulfilled long-term through funding, making sure our taxpayer dollars are indeed going to where they're supposed to go.
Well, let me ask about some of that, because I've heard from some Republicans in Texas who say, where is the Republican oversight in Congress with all these changes? What do you say to that?
Well, I sit on the Appropriations Committee, and I tell you what, I look through the lens of every dollar going out of the Treasury is my responsibility to make sure it's going where it's supposed to go. And I'll give you an example. In the fiscal year 25 appropriations bills, we worked very hard to get rid of DEI and some of these other junk programs. And it would be a shame, no one's really talking about it, but in 36 days, funding runs out, or very soon, funding runs out. And what happens then? So we got to make sure that the government doesn't necessarily get shut down, but that we extend the funding mechanism for everyone, but we also hold people accountable. And the executive branch is no different.
Yeah, I want to ask about the funding here in just a moment, but have you heard from any Republicans who say, listen, we're concerned that the Republican Congress isn't doing enough to oversee some of these drastic changes that the president is making here? I mean, some Democrats say, hey, he's crossed the line legally of what he can do. Should the Republican Congress, majority of Congress, be doing more?
In my eyes, Congress has two main functions. One is appropriations, making sure the power of the purse is real, making sure that our taxpayer dollars go to the right place. The other part is oversight. And we should always be overseeing the executive branch, right? We should always be seeing what exactly does the Department of Education do? Where does that money go, right? And I think that's one of the exciting things that DOGE, now it's an outside entity, but that is trying to do is essentially everyone needs to come before the carpet and explain where our taxpayer dollars are going. And if you don't have an answer for that, then that's where you zero out accounts. And then you also find areas that do work. How do you plus up and protect those things? That's the role of Congress. That's why I came here. And I think so many of my colleagues agree that's what we need to get back to doing.
Two questions about Elon Musk. To your knowledge, does Elon Musk and his staff have security clearance?
I don't know the security clearances on it, but I would say this: you don't need a security clearance in order to review some of the budgetary items. These are all public documents, if you will, and they should be public. I mean, we got to get back to we the people, where an everyday citizen can essentially determine where's my taxpayer dollars going and get an answer for it, whether it's the most richest person in the world like Elon or whether it's the poorest American, in our country. Everyone deserves an answer.
Congressman, you visited the border a few weeks ago. Some politicians have described it as a war zone. Governor Greg Abbott just the other day at the White House said, undocumented immigration is slow to a trickle. I'm curious what you saw and what you think still needs to be done now by President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I represent two-thirds of the Texas-Mexico border. I'm on the border literally every single week in some form or fashion. I've seen it at the worst of worst. Most recently, though, it has essentially died down, right? The amount of people coming over is very small. But I'd also say this too. There are some counties that I represent that the number of high-speed chases is zero, meaning it's come to a complete stop. There's other counties that I represent along the border that just yesterday they had 14 high-speed chases. So while there's going to be less people coming over and giving themselves up, there is going to be an increase in gotaways, people essentially trying to escape, if you will. I want to get back to the point where Texas and Mexico, the United States and Mexico, work hand in hand to make sure both our countries are safe, both our countries are prosperous. As you know, Texas and Mexico, Mexico is our number one trading partner. So trade and commerce needs to thrive. We also need to hold these convicted criminals accountable and get them the hell out of our country.
With the threat of tariffs on hold for a month, though, is that good working relationship still possible, do you think?
I recently visited with the Mexican ambassador to the United States, and I'll visit with him again. And I was pretty frank. I essentially said, "Hey, look, the deck has changed, and we need to have partnership. They're real partnerships." And I was encouraged to see Mexico step up and say they were willing to surge some troops to the border. I was encouraged to see them be willing to hold fentanyl accountable. You hadn't seen that in years past. A lot of that is due to President Trump's kind of his ability to negotiate, if you will. But long term, this is where Congress needs to come in. Congress needs to have a relationship with some of these folks where we go, look, foreign aid and supporting. We're all about making sure our friends and allies are protected, but it cannot just be a one-way conversation. I mean, a relationship. This has to be a partnership where we're both coming together. I think Mexico understands that, but we'll see how the next several weeks plays out.
Couple last questions here. You spent 20 years in the Navy, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. I want to ask about President Trump saying that the United States would take back the Panama Canal, now Gaza and Greenland also. Would you support military action for any of those?
President Trump has an interesting way of negotiating. He likes to negotiate in public, and I appreciate that. I mean, he essentially puts everyone on notice and says, these are the things that are important to me. My time in the military, I actually went through the Panama Canal. I know exactly the importance of that strategic location, and I know the importance of Panama. And for the longest time, Panama was the United States' most closest ally. That since has fallen off. We got to get back to that. That's the way I take President Trump kind of pushing Panama, if you will. Greenland, I mean, that's another kind of issue, but I think he's just kind of highlighting the importance of some of these strategic locations across the world. Gaza, I mean, that is a complicated problem set that will be complicated for 100 years, if not longer. It's been complicated for a long time, but the key is the United States has to stand firm with our ally Israel and other regional partners in order to make sure that region is safe.
President Trump said he wants his new Secretary of Education to put herself out of a job. Can the president, though, single-handedly close the Department of Education?
I think he can certainly push for that, and I think Congress has a role. And one of the things that Congress should be doing is asking, what do we get out of the Department of Education? I mean, I view the world through the lens of the states should be doing the work. The local government should be determining what's best for their children. I also think, Pell Grants work. I think TRIO is important program. I think there's other important federal programs there. But once again, this is where everybody should come before the carpet, that carpet being Congress, and say, hey, what do you do here? What do we get for our taxpayer dollars? And if the answer is nothing, then that certainly needs to go away.
Last question here. It's not getting a lot of attention yet, but Congress has to come up with a spending plan by March 14th, or else risk another government shutdown or a government shutdown. From my understanding, no top line number has been agreed to yet. It's not unusual for Congress to go up to the last minute, but do you think we're going to get an agreement?
We are weeks away from the end of funding, and it's
Sure.
dangerous for a couple of different reasons. One, it's dangerous for our military to be underfunded, especially when we're certainly asking them to do more by surging under the southern border, by thinking about reopening Guantanamo, Gitmo at a very high clip. And it's also dangerous to, President Trump's agenda of wanting to secure the border and getting rid of these convicted criminal aliens, increasing the bed space for DHS and some of these, all that costs resources. And now is not the time for Congress to blame somebody else for not doing their job. Congress needs to do their job in the next several weeks and get a budget, a conservative budget that can accomplish all these things. And if we don't, we have failed the American people.
Let me ask you this last thing. I've just been curious about with all the headlines, with all these cost savings that Elon Musk and the Trump administration appear to be getting with USAID closing, other government buyouts, when and if those actually happen. What's going to happen to all that money that's being saved? Where does it go?
I mean, it should go towards lowering our deficit. There's no doubt that our deficit is out of control. There's no doubt that inflation is a real big issue. A big part of it is, I mean, what about us as American citizens? That money needs to come back into our pockets. And so many people are questioning, what are we doing? I mean, why are we giving all these funds and resources while all it's doing is increasing the deficit? Every bit of government should be questioned on a regular basis. And, it's really Congress's job. Sadly, we haven't done that for a while, but we need to get back to questioning every dollar that goes out and making sure that our return on investment for our American citizens is indeed meets the mark of keeping us safe, making sure we're prosperous, and making sure our kids have that future that we all want.
Congressman, good to see you.
Thanks, Jason.